Since the end of 2025, Minneapolis has been under occupation by federal agents.
We're all human beings here. I don't give a shit who you are, where you came from, what color you are. It doesn't fucking matter. This is wrong.
I'm a filmmaker who lives in San Francisco, but I'm originally from the Midwest, and I have friends in Minneapolis. One of them is Megan. Not only is she a resident there, but she also happens to hold a PhD in media studies. Of course, when I saw what was happening there, I gave her a call, and what she told me felt like info every American should know. So we decided to share these conversations with y'all and hope to get real info out there about what's been happening in Minneapolis and how we might be able to learn how to come together. Join us for the What Now on YouTube. Hi, my name is Christina Matwani, and I'm a filmmaker located in San Francisco. When I saw what was happening in Minneapolis, I decided to call my friend Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I hold a PhD in media studies and social movements. I'm a longtime Minneapolis resident and participated in the 2020 uprising after George Floyd's murder.
So we've been recording our conversations while we've been processing what's been happening in Minneapolis. And we feel like there's some useful information here about what's happened on the ground and maybe how you could organize in your own community, just like Minneapolis did. So we are posting, this is our first episode, and we are posting it on March 24th, which is 2 months since Alex Preddy's murder. And we have a lot more conversations to come as well. So thank you so much for being here with us, and we look forward to sharing our conversations with you.
I'm sure y'all have heard quite a bit about Minneapolis, but we're just kind of going to try and fill in some of the blanks and give a nice cohesive narrative about how all this fuckery has evolved.
The beginning of all of this stuff really seemed like it started on November 18th of 2025, right?
Yeah, and what they did on November 18th, I think, was a little bit of a test run, actually. And I happened to be working in East St. Paul at the time, just about a mile and a half from where the company was. So I was sitting at my desk and heard the helicopter circling, which is not an uncommon sound for those of us who kind of were around during 2020. It's like one of those almost like trigger noises where you perk up right away and you kind of wonder what's going on. And yeah, they raided kind of an industrial facility in a relatively low income neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is just across the river from Minneapolis.
So I have a clip from the news of that day that we can show.
Community members and elected officials spoke at what they called a vigil today after yesterday's federal operation in St. Paul. Outside of Brotex, St. Paul community members clashed with federal agents yesterday. Homeland Security, the DEA, and ICE were there as part of what they call a criminal investigation. Frankie McClister joins us on the street where it happened and has the details. Frankie.
Hi there, Shayla. We're hearing that more than 200 attended this morning's community vigil. As you can see behind me, that's Brotex. As we've been here all morning long, we've seen trucks going in and out of the facility in addition to employees. So it seems to be that it is operating just as normal. We're going to show you some video right now of what the scene looked like outside of this company yesterday. Now we're hearing more than 10 were detained, but haven't been able to confirm that. Today's vigil was organized by COPL, an organization who represents Latin families.
So did you guys have any idea that this was coming? That DHS was coming?
Not really. They hadn't made any announcements at that point. This is pre sort of Operation Metro Surge having a formal title. One thing that we had seen prior was they did, and it was probably maybe even like last October. So not, it's like maybe October 2025, maybe even September. They did a similar kind of pop-up raid style thing in South Minneapolis on East Lake Street, which is a heavily traditionally Latino corridor with a lot of businesses. And that was kind of the only other thing we had seen or heard at all from DHS or ICE at that time.
So on November 25th, it seems like that was when another big kind of event started kicking off here, that there was a big raid in St. Paul?
Yeah, there was another big raid in St. Paul, and kind of the interesting thing about that one was the St. Paul Police Department actually was assisting them, and there were also some chemical irritants deployed at that one, so it escalated kind of quickly, like the Brotex raid.
I'm Lauren Lemanchek. Happening right now, we're following federal agent activity once again in St. Paul. Our crews are on scene near 600 Rose Avenue East on the city's east side. Now, that's just across the street from the St. Paul Public Library in Arlington Hills and also near East Emmanuel Lutheran Church. We do know that St. Paul police are on the scene. We do know that there were federal agents out there tear gassing protesters who showed up. This location is several miles from Brotex, where ICE agents arrested 14 people less than 1 week ago. That raid brought out protesters and at times did grow violent with pushing and shoving. Agents that day also deployed tear gas to keep people away. Now, we're going to take a live look of the scene right now. You can see an incredibly large crowd out there on this Tuesday morning. As we mentioned, there has been federal activity out there believed to be ICE.
So I think a lot of people who aren't in Minneapolis didn't know about these kind of things that were coming before kind of the big thing of the announcement of Metro Surge, and then also the death of Rene Good. So the next kind of like bullet point that we have of when something happened was December 4th, when there was the announcement of Metro Surge and
Operation Metro Surge. You got to say it like that, right?
Yes, the Operation Metro Surge. So I don't have a clip for this one, but I do have an article just so we can see that this is from PBS NewsHour. And so it was announced at the time 2,000 agents would be coming, which seems like a crazy amount given the population of Minneapolis, right?
Yeah, and Minneapolis proper has probably about 350,000 people. St. Paul is, I would say, another 200 to 250,000. Might even be a little higher at this point. So you're really talking all included with the entire metro and the suburbs, first ring suburbs. I'd say about 1.5 million people tops for the entire area they've been covering.
So at this point, what was the vibe in Minneapolis about this?
At this point, I don't think anyone was preparing. I mean, I think a lot of the mutual aid and community groups were certainly preparing, but sort of the general public was basically like, yeah, we've known they've been coming. They've been kind of threatening to come to Minneapolis for quite some time. We all figured we'd be a target at some point. But, when they announced the specific to Minneapolis Operation Metro Surge, I think people were still sort of like, well, this is more of the same rhetoric we've been hearing for a while.
So on December 15th, there was a story about ICE dragging a pregnant woman across the street. And actually, I do have a video of it.
She's pregnant. She's pregnant. You don't see her stomach? Y'all just dragging her around. Let her go.
As ICE agents dragged this pregnant woman across the street, Tanika Dortch watched and recorded.
They chased her down to the corner and they took her, and they were really forceful and brutal with her.
She's pregnant. She's pregnant. You don't see her stomach?
Dortch and others shouted at agents to stop, but they didn't.
They had busted the window open and snatched people out of the cars.
They're attacking people. They're attacking people.
The chaos started around 1 o'clock Monday afternoon at the corner of 29th Street and Pillsbury Avenue. ICE says it went after a car as part of an operation when rioters started throwing chunks of ice at them and shouted death threats. That's when they say the woman you see on the ground here tried to vandalize an ICE squad car.
It was a really crazy, crazy moment.
But Dorch says she saw the whole thing and insists that's not how it happened.
That's a lie. She didn't rush. She didn't try to vandalize any of their vehicles.
And ICE says it stopped trying to arrest the woman for their own safety, but they arrested 2 others who they say assaulted agents, and some of those agents even required medical treatment.
She's pregnant.
Okay.
Interesting, right? How it's depicted. I mean, this is, we're talking about the need to document. I mean, this is a perfect example. The woman who documented this, what happened here, is saying DHS is giving a completely different account of what the reality was. And she has literal proof because of this, because of the phone.
Yeah, and I think, that's again, some of this, a similar discourse has happened in Minneapolis with police violence. And so, not to say that's everywhere all the time, but, the historical perspective is, if there is a violent act happening, that you get out your phone and you record it, because you never know what the narrative might be coming out of that. And I would say, this is a good way to characterize this instance would be this is the first time we saw ICE doing and DHS doing things that would lead up to Rene Good. So it's about 3 weeks, I guess, before Rene Good, but that's the first time we really saw that style of sort of violence and kidnapping.
On December 20th, one of the first arrests happened. It was a 20-year-old U.S. citizen detained at Whipple, and that was covered here. Maybe you want to talk about this source a little bit?
Yeah, so I think, partially given the age of the arrestee, who happened to be 20, this is the Minnesota Daily, which is the student newspaper of the University of Minnesota. So a little more focused on kind of college age individuals and things, students of the U of M.
And was this arrest a big deal in Minneapolis? Because we didn't hear about this outside of Minneapolis, I feel like.
I don't remember it, this one in particular, so certainly not kind of on the radar quite as much.
So, and comes the first big protest, which there were 10,000 people in South demanding ICE out. You can see it's pretty big.
Yeah, it is. It's quite big, and I think they're walking. If I had to guess, they're walking down Lake Street toward, that's Lake Street, and that's about Nicollet or maybe Hiawatha. Heavily Latino neighborhood. That Lake Street corridor is, I've lived here for close to 20 years and has been kind of a center of the Latino community in Minneapolis since then. And probably longer.
So on December 22nd, right before Christmas, there was an announcement that ICE may be targeting churches at Christmas.
Raya, at a press conference yesterday, some political leaders said it's possible ICE agents might interrupt church services tonight, and some churches are preparing for that possibility.
The holidays are a season of hope, a season where fear has no place.
This is a wrong turn of the winner thing that will even take away the meaning for the reason for the season.
Bishop Richard Howell of Shiloh Temple International Ministries understands why people might be more fearful this season because of the presence of immigration, customs, and enforcement agents.
I can speak freely for our church that we will do everything we can to secure our parishioners and worshipers.
He believes people should have hope this time of year, and he'll do what he can to protect it.
There has to be a warrant, I believe, for someone to come in. And certainly, I think as leaders, faith leaders, we have people at the store that will stand at the door and invite them not to come in for this moment at that time. and reserve their duties for another time.
In a statement, Archbishop Bernard Hebda says local Homeland Security officials told Archdiocesan representatives they don't intend to conduct enforcement actions at churches and K-12 schools unless there is an imminent public safety threat. Still, some people are preparing for the possibility.
I think our faith leaders will find it very possible to secure all houses of worship, regardless of the season of the day that we're celebrating.
Because for him, hope is the one thing people have this holiday season.
I think that we're the greatest healers, I think, on the planet, on the face of the earth, to really emphasize the power of hope in a time of despair and hopelessness.
So interesting.
Pretty poetic, yeah.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because it says DHS was saying that they are not going to go into churches or K-12 schools unless there's an imminent threat. And we've seen that that's not true, at least in the case of schools. Correct?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I got a couple of thoughts on that. So, they actually, I don't know if it's ICE specific or DHS with the sort of organizational level change was made at, but that being able to even go into churches and schools and hospitals is a change in the law that Trump and his administration did. So prior to that, ICE was not even allowed to go near a school. It was a designated sort of like no-fly zone, for lack of a better expression. And I can't remember the exact timing, but like maybe even March or April of 2025, they formally changed that policy. Yeah. And, I think in terms of when kind of the greater Minneapolis area and Twin Cities area started paying attention was probably, this moment, because we had seen, a couple more formal sort of industrial manufacturing related raids, which ICE is known for. There's in greater Minnesota and in the surrounding area, there's a lot of sort of meat processing plants or kind of large industrial facilities that ICE has raided before, years and years ago. But, I think the kind of, they might be targeting churches on Christmas is like, okay, we're starting to understand who these people are after watching them drag a pregnant woman across the street in the snow and use chemical irritants at the drop of a hat at people's faces. And so, this is a kind of a moment where it's like, all right, their goals are becoming clear. People are starting to really pull back and on their movements, I think, and also pay a lot more of attention to each individual instance and headline.
So on January 6th, this is actually kind of interesting. Kristi Noem showed up. Our good friend Kristi Noem.
She did in the flesh.
This tweet or whatever says, thanks to the patriots at ICE, the Minneapolis area and our nations are safer. We are incredibly proud of their continued work to remove gang members, terrorists, drug traffickers, and predators from our community. America has your back. And then here's Kristi Noem. Notice how all of the workers are also blurred out.
It's the first thing I noticed.
Yeah. And here she is shaking hands and walking through. I'm assuming that this is like the ICE office in Minneapolis.
Probably the Whipple Federal Building. They didn't mention either that they were here to arrest Christmas churchgoers. They failed to put that in the tweet.
Yes. So interesting about the timing of this also is that the next kind of thing that happens is the very next day that Rene Good is murdered. And I think probably everybody watching this is familiar. This was kind of the big news that hit everything off outside of Minneapolis, that people actually started hearing about and knowing about what had happened.
kind of give a little bit of a resident timeline to that. So by January 6th, which is how many days is that? About 2 weeks after the Christmas announcement. So by January 6th, there were neighborhood watches, there were rapid response groups actively patrolling every day. There were mutual aid efforts giving kids rides to school, dropping off groceries, starting to do the rent support and things like that. So that really did happen kind of between Christmas and when Christy Nome visited. January 6th was the first day I went out and did rapid response and observing. And I live about 4 blocks from one of the other main ethnic corridors, Central Avenue in Northeast Minneapolis. And kind of started that week, I just started going for, morning walks around my neighborhood because it seemed like a great idea. And on January 6th, by the time the second I got to Central Avenue, there were, agents that I watched take someone off a bicycle. And, not many people bike in Minneapolis in the winter, though there are some. And then they did detain an individual off the bike, and I walked back to the main drag on Central and started going the other way. And, within 30 seconds, they had pulled over and were detaining observers that day. So I watched them chase a woman across the street and through traffic. And, the city bus had to slam on its brakes. It was very ridiculously unsafe. And throw her into a silver SUV and drive off very quickly, snatch and grab style. So, even kind of very early January, we are seeing sort of much closer to the state of things that escalated with Rene Good and that we've kind of continued to see throughout the occupation.
So it seems like this was actually starting to become kind of a fever pitch before Rene Good. Like people were getting more involved. There had been some incidents, and people were feeling more inclined to like get out and be documenting, which this clip is from, I think the day it happened, January 8th. So the day after. And since then, and what we've seen with all these other instances of stuff is that we end up slowly, or not even that slowly, but eventually getting more and more angles because there's so many people actually documenting, which, we haven't talked about Alex Preddy yet, but when we get to that, it's like if those other angles didn't exist, the lies that DHS told may have been believable and they may have been able to say, this is what happened. But so it's also not, it's kind of a testament to like, we need more people documenting rather than, oh, well, one person's got it, it's fine. It's a little like we need everybody at every angle.
A powerful show of support. Several hundred people are gathered in the streets of Minneapolis tonight, burning candles, holding signs, singing and chanting, all honoring the life of a 37-year-old woman, a U.S. citizen who was shot and killed by an ICE agent today. Cell phone footage shows one angle of what happened.
What the What the
You heard 3 shots fired, a crash, and then witnesses running to help. The woman who was shot died at the hospital. The head of Homeland Security called that driver a domestic terrorist who was trying to run over an ICE agent. She says the agent who shot that woman saved his own life and the life of his partners.
It's very clear that this individual was harassing and impeding law enforcement operations.
Today's shooting stirred some strong emotions for those who call Minneapolis home.
What are we doing? What is our country? What is happening? My God.
These are our neighbors, and we didn't ask for these people to be here and to be, shooting people outside of our homes. So I think I think it's just a really community feeling of anger.
Just thinking that there's no way whatever this person did that they deserve to be killed for it.
Our Ashley Grams joins us now from where that shooting happened today. And Ashley, I know people are still there paying their respects tonight.
Yeah, it's been over 12 hours since this shooting happened, and people are here not far from 34th and Portland. You can see that growing memorial there, candles, flowers, signs, and notes. Now, this vigil happened actually several hours ago, and we saw a wide range of emotions during that vigil. Hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder here in the street. In South Minneapolis, a growing memorial. Some making their voices heard through song, others chanting in the street.
The people united will never be defeated.
This tribute marks the spot where 37-year-old Rene Good was shot and killed by a federal officer Wednesday morning.
Say her name! Say her name!
As the sun set, the crowd grew. Hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder in the street.
This is a small gesture that grounds us and reminds us how we can support one another and acknowledge what we're sacrificing to protect our neighbors.
The wide range of emotions clear.
Anger, sadness, frustration.
Many people taking the moment to speak out against ICE and their tactics.
Saw the video. I just totally thought it was murder, plain and simple.
Though federal and local authorities are in dispute over whether that use of force was necessary. What's not in dispute? A community deeply impacted by this loss of life.
Passion, empathy towards others and towards what happened, for sure.
So it seems like there's an interesting thing here. They keep saying hundreds of people shoulder to shoulder. On the lower third part, it says thousands of people gather. And I know in our notes, the note about it is over 50,000 people. But then Mirak, is that how you pronounce it? Mirak?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm frozen again. Stop freezing. Mirak says it's 100,000.
Yeah, and I think, that's kind of I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of, my initial reactions to the video too, is they keep saying hundreds when clearly the photo is at least several thousand people, if nothing else. And, it's dark out, so it's hard to kind of tell. When I was kind of reading through the vigils from the night of, I think what I read was there were close to 10,000 people that gathered. The 100,000, they had another march and sort of vigil a few days after that I think was larger, Saturday afternoon or whatever. But definitely some discrepancies in the kind of description in the photo, to say the least. And that's when you think about the Twin Cities area local news outlets, that is one of the more conservative ones, from Dr. Megan, media studies professor, just to point that out.
That's good to know.
Mhm.
It's good to know because, when you're not from there, you don't know which is what. And these are just what I found on the internet. So it's like curious to find out who, and you kind of assume that if it's network news, that it's going to be straight reporting.
Yeah, no,
But
and
we know that's not true.
no, and kind of to clarify, CBS has been sort of in the news a lot, maybe for the wrong reasons, journalistically lately. And
Yeah,
I
lately
would
in particular.
And I would imagine whatever directives are at the national level for how to cover events like this have probably trickled down to the local level as well, because it's they're all affiliates.
Yeah, interesting. So now we're going to move on to January 14th, which this is kind of, for me, not being there, this actually really sticks out in my mind because, in 2020, I was working on a film about what was happening with George Floyd and the kind of uprising. And it was about what was happening here more locally in Oakland, but it was talking about the national level. And at the time, it was also the height of the pandemic. And I was literally making this film in real time. And so I was just watching live streams of protests in different cities on repeat. So I had multiple screens. And so when all of this stuff started kind of like happening in Minneapolis, I went into that mode again. And in particular, I was texting with a friend who also does this with me, who watches all the protests, and we send each other like links, like I found one here, I found one there, and we were watching this protest on January 14th that was in what looked like a more suburban-ish area of Minneapolis. It's not? Okay. It looked that way, at least from the live stream, and somebody who's not familiar with Minneapolis. But and it was nighttime, and there was a crowd, and they were at like 4-way stops, and there was a lot of tear gassing going on, and it was very tense. And we were hearing reports. I was watching the protesting, but we were hearing reports in the live stream that a man had been shot, another person had been shot, and that there had been a baby tear gassed in a family. And we didn't have all the information yet at that time, but like the next day, this really kind of popped off in the news. And I think I do have a clip of it.
Canisters that law enforcement, those federal agents are deploying to try to disperse the crowds. This is what we were hit with just a few minutes ago. Behind me, though, Julie, we now have state officials, that state patrol in those lime green vests. And then these are also Minneapolis police officers who are trying to hold the scene here and hold the line. I believe that the federal agents, the ICE agents, are just a block down. They have another perimeter there. I want to take viewers quickly through what we have seen throughout the night. We got here at around 8 p.m. and there was a couple dozen protesters and about 5 or 6 ICE agents that were clashing, yelling at each other, etc. Over time, that crowd has continued to grow to hundreds of protesters, and that line of federal agents has continued to grow. We're going to back up a little bit here, Julie, to make sure we don't get hit with any chemical irritant. But what we have been seeing, Julie, is continual clashes between federal agents and between the protesters. And what will happen is those federal agents will deploy a chemical irritant, whether that be tear gas or a pepper bomb. The protesters will back up, and then a couple minutes later, they will come back up and start clashing with those federal agents. We were seeing protesters throwing snow and ice at those federal agents. And I also want to play some sound from a man about what he saw one of those protesters do to a federal agent. Take a listen.
We were down at Whipple, and we were protesting down at Whipple, and we got wind that there was a shooting up here, so we all headed up here. And as soon as we got here, ICE had the road blocked off right here, and people surrounded their cars, busted out a couple windows. A guy jumped in the front seat with one of the assholes, punched him in the face. It was absolute mayhem when we first got here. I mean, they finally took control of the street. That's why they're all there, but they weren't like that before when we first got here. They were all surrounded by protesters.
So you said one of the protesters jumped in the vehicle of an ICE agent?
Yeah, and punched him in the face and then jumped back out of the vehicle.
Now, this presence of State Patrol and MPD officers, that is new on scene. That happened, I would say, about 20 to 30 minutes ago. So it seems like some of the ICE agents have left. As I mentioned, they seem to be about a block down, holding another perimeter, those federal agents. But these protesters, they're banging on drums here. They've been chanting, stay off of our streets, that these are our streets. And you also can hear those whistles. And what those whistles are doing is they are trying to alert people in the neighborhood that there is this federal law enforcement present and that there are ICE agents in the neighborhood. So Julie, what we hope right now is that law enforcement is able to keep the scene peaceful and that we don't see any more clashes between these protesters and law enforcement, Julie.
It has been incredibly tense. I mean, that's a stunning story from that witness that says he saw a protester punch a federal agent.
So this is interesting because there's a lower third on this whole thing that says federal agent shoots man in the leg. They never mention that part. And they're only talking about how maybe there was a federal agent that got punched in the face.
Well, and kind of my dissertation was on mainstream and Black press news coverage of the civil rights movement. And one of the things mainstream media is really, really bad at is telling the story of social movements from a perspective that's not directly through the lens of, the officials, right? Quote unquote. So the police, the government, DHS, ICE agent, city council, mayor. And it's fascinating because this is actually a perfect example of how and why that happens, because they're looking for sources, credible sources, and oftentimes those are the more official narratives and the people in positions of governmental authority, in some way. But that was MN Angry Man's debut.
I know.
Well.
We love that guy.
Love that guy.
I'm sure at some point we'll talk more about him. Because
Yeah. The North Side is one of the sort of historically Black neighborhoods in Minneapolis. It has been neglected by city government and city resources for a very long time. It does tend to have some higher crime rates than the rest of the city, and a lot of community support. North Minneapolis is a community that has had to support itself for many years in Minneapolis. So I was a little surprised, to be perfectly honest, when ICE decided to go to the North Side because, they're kind of just as well organized as South in slightly different ways. I think for, folks on the ground in Minneapolis, the fact that there was the North Minneapolis shooting where the guy got shot in the leg was a definite sign that 1 week after you killed somebody, you're stupid enough and brazen enough to do it again. So I think, for a lot of folks here, it was jarring because it showed very clearly that there was going to be no change in tactic, level of violence, or methods of any kind despite Rene Good's murder.
Well, of course, the internet couldn't resist sending their worst. And so this was on January 17th. This guy is like alt-right guy. His name is Jake Lang, and he showed up in Minneapolis with this idea that he was going to have his own protest in support of ICE. And so I'll just play the clip because I think it'll show what happens.
Earlier today, there was a small rally led by hardened January 6th rider Jake Lang. That relatively small group was drowned out by the counter-protesters. Things got a bit tense. People were throwing water balloons at the right-wing group, and Lang appeared to be bleeding at one point. The counter-protesters have appeared to have dispersed the right-wing group. Police then came. There was a bit of a face-off, and police then retreated. The counter-protesters are now continuing to march through the city. Counter-protesters are encircling one of the few people that was with the small right-wing protest. and they forced the protester to take off an overshirt that has said freedom on it, and they're surrounding the man as he tries to leave the crowd.
That AP guy gets an A+ for objective language. That was really good and factual description.
There's like a famous photograph from this where he's up on this ledge, kind of like trying to avoid being attacked. And there's a woman's hand, I think, with nails like over his face. And I mean, this isn't something that we have necessarily in our outline, but just to follow up on this guy, of course, he showed back up at a later date and he kicked over a sculpture that was made out of ice in front of, was that in front of the Whipple building?
State Capitol.
Okay. And it says on it, prosecute.
I think it says, yeah, prosecute ICE.
Prosecute. And he kicked over the letters. You can find it on the internet. It's kind of ridiculous. And he got arrested.
He did.
Can't help himself.
You know what?
All that
funny follow-up to the first instance on January 17th. So as the AP video shows, they were chasing Mr. Lang out of downtown, and he's a known kind of white supremacist, anti-queer, the usual for that sect. He's a known believer in those kinds of things, and he's leaving downtown. I think he was on like Hennepin Avenue, which is kind of down by Target Center where the Timberwolves play and a lot of big sports arenas and stuff. And two trans people picked him up in their car because he was bleeding and thought he needed medical attention. So he was rescued by the very humans that he generally talks some shit about.
Isn't that how it always goes?
Yeah.
So the next kind of thing that happened, which actually spurred a bigger issue that I think at a later date we'll talk probably a lot more about, but on the 18th, there was a protest in a church, and it is, I have a clip, but it's just to describe it. One of the, is he a pastor, I think, was found to be was he an ICE agent, or he was sympathetic to ICE?
I believe he was the acting director of sort of the Twin Cities branch of ICE. He had a very high leadership position within ICE.
And so some people decided to protest at the church that he preaches at, or I'm not sure the right terminology, but he and this spurred like a whole other, this was a snowball of a bunch
Side
of other
quest.
issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me bring up the clip.
Church service is now under investigation by the Justice Department.
An anti-ICE protest made its way into a St. Paul sanctuary during service. Protesters say a pastor at City's Church is also the acting director of the St. Paul Field Office of ICE. The Justice Department says it is investigating the incident, saying protesters violated the FACE Act. That law prohibits intimidating or interfering with people's rights to practice their faith. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has already responded, saying any violations of the law will be prosecuted, adding, quote, attacks against law enforcement and the intimidation of Christians are being met with full force of federal law.
So that's kind of the beginnings of what turns into a bigger deal.
Yeah. So that was a very notable protest and kind of a different tactic, I suppose, of voicing opinion and kind of calling out some, maybe we'll call it irony, that you're by day you're doing all these things and leading the charge against neighbors, and on the weekend you're just talking up Jesus or whatever. But
Thy neighbor.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then subsequently, so Don Lemon was in town, nationally known independent journalist. He and a local independent journalist who has been working independently for quite some time, super good, has won awards, and Nakima Armstrong, who is a leader within the community, has done a lot with police violence and protesting that and drawing attention to that cause. She ran for mayor a couple times back too, so she's a big community figure. They all were arrested several days later for that protest in particular.
Thank you so much for watching episode 1 of The What Now. If you're interested, please stay tuned to watch part 2. Please like and subscribe and follow our YouTube channel for more videos. And we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.